Hello, everyone. Linker here with the AFKArena podcast featuring the people that make the community what it is. And today we have a very unique guest. Will you please introduce yourself?
Hello, Linker. My name is Newton. I am the founder and the guildmaster of Casuals 2. I was also the guildmaster for Casuals from February 2020 to about July 2020. I went on a bit of a break for a couple months, but I rejoined the guild community as well as the game earlier this month. And it's nice to meet you, Linker. I've been a huge fan of your work, especially your previous interviews with Whitesushi and Kale, and huge fan of your work overall. I'm excited for what you've already offered and what you're planning to offer in the future.
Thank you so much. I'm honestly humbled because for anyone who doesn't know, I don't know how they would know because we have Legends Championship and Casuals is literally everywhere on the bets. But they're the most titled guild up to date in terms of competitive success, both in events and leagues championship. There's many speculation to the source of their success, which we'll definitely dive into later. But first, Newton, why won't you tell us who you are?
Yes. So in real life, I'm a physician, but in game, I'm just one of the endless masses of free-to-play players. I'm on, I'm in region 5. In terms of progression, I'm proudly on chapter 24. Daily arena, I'm probably around rank 160, and yeah, on the challenger ladder, I'm gold 1. So.
Solid. Definitely more influence on the challengers ladder than most Gold 1 players, but just let me break it down. Wait, there's all these Newton accounts like Newton Alt 4 or 5. They look a little bit after chapter 24.
I can confirm that those are actual players. They're just having fun with the fact that
right.
I don't have any presence on any actual ladders in game or even regional championships.
Right. So in game, solid chapter 24 progress. Got to shout out all the players in chapter 24 listening to this. And do you play other games like AFKArena, or is this your main thing?
Surprisingly, this is actually my first game and my only game. I think
really.
Yeah. The reason I got into this game was, I was drawn, similar to Whitesushi, I was drawn by the lack of an energy system, which didn't put as much pressure or burden to play the game, and
right.
And it actually was very conducive for my lifestyle. But I guess the initial stimulus was the fantastic marketing that AFKArena publicized, on YouTube, and I wanted to check what this game is about.
I'm still waiting for those Belinda skins.
I'm waiting for a lot of that kind of stuff.
right? Yeah, that's absolutely mad, their marketing. I've heard they do it with other companies, though, which might explain it.
Yeah. I always love the Reddit post comparing the marketing that they still use, or the older marketing tactics that they use, versus the actual gameplay.
Shout out to Kale making a flare soon for the gameplay. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. So yeah, Casuals. Actually, Kale is a member of Casuals. I don't know fact. But first game ever. So how do you even know of other mechanics if this is the first thing you ever picked up?
It took me a while. I started playing a little bit after Whitesushi and Kale. So I guess in terms of my gaming background overall, like when I was younger, I used to play games such as Diablo, Warcraft, and I had a little stint in League for a while, and I think Whitesushi, and similar to yourself. But I think those games, gave me sort of a foundation. And then after that, it was just like a lot of flying blindly, reading some very OG guides, talking about concepts ranging from like how Brutus was OP to Wilder's trio combos, and just just following some of the very OG names in Legends regional.
Definitely OG stuff. Definitely.
Yeah.
Talking about the natural development, whereas you play Diablo for a bit and then you pick up on the first gacha mobile game you ever played, and then you naturally become the leader of the most successful guild, which happens to all of us, of course. How did that actually happen? Like, what made you join Casuals? How did that happen?
Yeah, so actually, Casuals is not something that I founded. It was something I joined. The full story of Casuals, it was started sometime in May 2019. Right before the one and only Guild Wars, which I hope they bring
Right.
back at some point. And at the time, it was founded by the leader Bamboozle. He had a couple people that he worked with. One of them, his name was Tuggy, and he united a bunch of other high-powered players, including guys like Mastermind or Saint Regis, and at the time, in the very ancient history, it used to Legends Regional Championship. It never used to be one super region, which comprised like 180 servers, and consistently the names that would win would be like Siphon and Bitizen, essentially. But once they started having these separate regions, it opened the door for a lot of players who joined much further afterwards to have a chance to compete. And guys like Bamboozle, he himself was a very notable individual. I think he's won like 3 or 4 championships. And there are guys like Mastermind, who originally was one of the most dominant players. He won 30 matches in a row before finally retiring. And there were other people, and they were all united by Bamboozle, I would say. I joined Casuals around September of 2019. The old home that I was a part of, I was the recruiter there. At the time, there were a couple very high-level guilds, Casuals among them. A lot of them were gated by certain standards or criteria, whether it was VIP, progression, or Legends Regional Championship power status, stuff like that. And so I listed my credentials, and impressive as they may be, they weren't opening up any doors on my own merit.
Right.
So actually, I had actually done recruiting for my older guild, and what was happening was actually what we kind of turned into a de facto feeder guild for a lot of the more high-powered guilds, because our players would join us, when they started the game, but then they would eventually turn into some pretty notable names. I think the most notable of the names that I ended up having a hand in was a guy named Trozo, who won the Region 6 twice. And at the time, he wasn't a well-known name, but Casuals recruited him, and then Trozo put in a word to Bamboozle about my presence, and then I connected with Bamboozle at that time. This is September 2019. I wasn't offered, obviously, a role in Casuals. I didn't have credentials or anything like that, but I was given the opportunity to start Casuals too.
I think there's a lot to it there. So let me see if I get you straight.
Yes.
You talked about how Legends Championship used to be different. This is, for some of our viewers, we're talking about the server 90 split, which started splitting things into regions. This is August 2019. And at the time, definitely there were less players that dominated the meta much stronger. If we're talking about Siphon and his likes that were just consistently winning those championships before there were even the frames to reward them for all their success. And then later, after the region started splitting, you say that you approach all these guilds, and obviously many of them required some sort of credentials, which your gold at this chapter was not enough to get quite yet, and maybe because they don't see the potential, but that's on them. Because you eventually, under Bamboozle, you did make it into Casuals too. Let me see if I get that right, and then follow on from there.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, Casuals 2 was never a thing, and then I founded it, and it was me, and it was a guy who's actually been with me from the start. His name is Superb Main, and he's finished top 4 in Region 6 a few times. And it was literally just me, him, another AFK Discord mod named Rise Dynamic, and it was just a whole army of my own alt accounts, because I was just trying to.
Right.
We were a level 3 guild when we started, and I just wanted to pump up the activity level as much as possible. So I had 20 of my own alts on the guild, and we were just doing dailies every day. And
how much time did that take alone?
When we started, it was just such a grind. I think the goal that I had from the very beginning when I started the Casuals 2 initiative was to show actually that a player can be far more than his monetary investment into the game. As I said before,
right,
a lot of guilds, a lot of the communities, especially at the time, they judged people by financial commitment to the game, and they equated that to passion. And it was something that I really thought was toxic, unhealthy. So I really wanted to, well, first of all, I wanted to create like a real guild, I wanted to turn Casuals 2 into an acknowledged guild, because I felt like at the time, sister guilds weren't, I don't think they were considered to be a real thing. I mean, I think there was only one other sister guild at the time. And
I think maybe it was Westworld. No, I don't know.
oh yeah, Westworld, I don't know if Westworld has a sister guild. The only one that I knew about at the time was I think Thousand Sunny, which eventually became Spire Gold after merging with Spire Army. They had some sister guilds, and like none of the sister guilds at the time were viewed in a light that was anywhere comparable to the original guild. And I wanted to change that with Casuals too, especially because Casuals was an established name at the time when I joined it. And
are you talking about top meta as they are now?
Yeah. I would say, I mean, the meta is drastically different, obviously, than it was at the time. But they had Bamboozle, who had won 3 championships at the time. They had Kita, who was eventually named the GM of Casuals. I think Kita had won a couple championships from Region 3. They had Mastermind, right, who had won 30 matches in a row, 5 championships.
Right.
They had Saint Regis, who had won a couple. They had Macaroni.
Somewhat notable names in there.
Yeah.
They're pretty successful at the time. And then you talk over Casuals too. How did that develop?
Yeah, so I connected with Bamboozle after he sniped my dear friend Trozo. And there's actually, what I discovered was that although there are a lot of powerful players, there are not a lot of people who are passionate about finding and recruiting players. And, in a lot of ways, building infrastructure, especially for a guild community. And I would assume this to be the case in almost every game, is more difficult than actually finding players who can fit that culture. And, in I think Bamboozle, I think as soon as we connected, even though I wasn't like a member of Casuals, he saw the potential in what my skills could offer. And I took it upon myself as a challenge to, again, prove the worth of a free-to-play player in a pay-to-win game.
Definitely, to some extent, a pay-to-win game.
Yeah,
Shout out to Corio and some players still making it through. Yeah. We do have some F2P names making in there, but definitely a pay-to-play game. At the time, by the way, were Casuals filtering by monetary commitment? Let's say it that way.
I think that there was some of that. It's tough to say. Like, I don't actually know the system of recruitment that Casuals had. It was I think at the time it was an invite-only guild. I think that's how they marketed themselves, but I feel like they definitely had to use some form of quantitative stats. They didn't, I wish I could comment more, because actually, as soon as I joined Casuals 2, I mean, I thought I was going to get like a lot of support and reinforcement from Bamboozle and Tuggy, like the old infrastructure. But I joined in a very odd period of time, because they actually both kind of, they were both on their way out of the game at the time. I started Casuals 2 sometime in September, and, actually within a month, Bamboozle had retired. So we had to rebuild our entire recruiting systems for both Casuals and Casuals 2 almost from scratch from the moment I started Casuals 2.
So props for the old infrastructure by Bamboozle and players like him, but you took over the new era. And how did that come to me, and how did that develop over time?
The successor of Bamboozle was a guy named Kita, and I think it's a very interesting story, depending on what you're talking about. And one of the original concepts that a lot of guides talked about was the Wildest Trio, and Kita was the person I credit for that. He was the person who discovered it, as well as some of the unique Mauler synergies that you'll see. A lot of these Wilder lineups that you see being used in the higher end now incorporate Zulrah. But if you look at some of the older guides, I mean, you'll see, Tassi Nomura, Leica, and Aaron, and then you'll see like a Mauler, for example, Brutus or Sophia. And that kind of creativity, a lot of it I actually attribute towards Kita. And his brain for the game was, he taught me a lot. He spent a lot of time teaching me, because I was sort of, we complemented each other in the sense that he was more of the brains of the meta at the time, I think. And one of the people that I think a lot of people, especially at the highest ends, looked up to. And for me, I was more about purely infrastructural elements, whether that was,
Right.
recruiting or scouting or, building our community a bit further. I really took charge in handling that. Never two distinct areas, because Kia was
Mhm.
a new leader. He wasn't entirely familiar with the responsibilities that entailed.
What does it mean to be the leader of casuals? What do you orchestrate?
There are a lot of areas involved with guild infrastructure, and I think we've always had a guiding principle at Casuals. And I think a lot of guilds, when they evaluate players, they always try to identify like what can the player do for the guild. Because like especially, I mean, a lot of people know Casuals through its, whether it's content creators like Whitesushi, Discord moderators like May or Kale, or the plethora of regional champions that we've been blessed to have.
Mhm.
It can be easy to get lost in the shuffle or take things for granted.
Mhm.
But actually, the governing principle that I've always maintained at Casuals is don't ask what players can do for your guild, ask what you can do for your guild, from the leadership perspective. And it was a systematic drive towards answering that question, whether it was enhancing scouting, enhancing recruiting, minimizing player turnover, or player retirement, whether it was enabling the Jalones or the fish sticks of the game to help regional champions, as much as physically possible, or pushing the meta or stuff like that. I mean, it's almost endless in terms of the number of improvements you can make. You just have to be very systematic and honest about answering that question of, are you doing the most you can for the players that chose to join your guild?
I feel like that's huge, but a second before we dive into that, I just want to get like the layer. Like, what does it look to be inside the chat? What kind of platforms do you work on? What kind of the different players' contributions, and how does it work within the guild to get you to that amount of success? Like, what's the secret in casuals, and what kind of system empowers the players as they achieve all the great achievements that they do in the guild so consistently?
Yeah, it's I wish I could tell you what the secret was. I think if it was easily reproducible, there would be far more guilds doing it. But I think if I'm being completely honest, I would say it's a lot of luck. When I started Casuals 2, in fact, when it was just me, Support main, Rise Dynamic, and an endless sea of my alt accounts, the first player I ever recruited was Jalon. like
Right.
how how
Right.
how was that? And originally we
So
were
it's some luck.
yeah, and originally we were a feeder guild to casuals, and we eventually earned our own reputation, but that was actually not by choice. A lot of players started refusing to go to from casuals to casuals, and the first player to start that movement was a guy named Fishsticks. The guy who broke the
Right.
record for the number of consecutive victories, in ever. And you find these players, and it's like I wish there was like something I could shed light upon that, like, all right, I knew Jalone, I knew what I was looking for, but not many of those guys exist.
Definitely, definitely. And do you, in order to organize all this luck and knowledge that you accumulated, do you have different channels? For example, a Discord for people that engage in strategy, in content
Oh,
creation. Like, how's that divided?
yeah, yeah, it's actually a great question. Yeah, of course. I think so. When I joined Casuals, via Casuals 2, we had 5 channels. We had
Right.
an announcements page. We had a tour, a towers guide page. We had a campaign page. We had like a general chat, and then like one other one other random chat. And I knew, like, I'm in a guild chat at Casuals 2 with me and 30 of my alt accounts, and this Discord is bare bones. Hardly anyone contacts each other. We felt like two distinct families, and I personally suffered from a lot of imposter syndrome. And as I mentioned, my goal was to prove the worth of a free-to-play player in a mostly pay-to-win game. And I knew that the only way to really feel like a community was to try and enrich the Discord as much as possible. And whether that was incorporating different resources, different guides, different channels for strategy, patch update discussions, or that kind of thing. That's something I really took an interest towards in developing, in order for the two guilds to feel like one, for us to feel like a real united front, but also to help further motivate, just overall community involvement from whether it was the supportive staff or the leadership, to the players who actively participate. And we have a wide range of players, and it was actually by design. I think when I first started at Casuals back in September, it was mostly just Legends regional participants. But I realized that you can't make a coherent dish with just one ingredient, right?
Right, right.
And just like I presented an untraditional skill set to casuals in the capacity of a scout and a recruiter at the time, I wanted people with differing backgrounds. And, I had one in a Discord Modern Rise dynamic. We actively pursued other members in the community who are not part of recognizable names, but were part of other guilds at the time. And, I approached them with full respect as much as possible, and those include people like Nay, who's the Discord moderator for several different platforms, as
Mhm.
well as, guys like Kale, who eventually joined, Alice or Juliet, who joined us as a completely random free-to-play player, but then
And then definitely made their own name.
yeah, they made their own name she made her own name with us. And then obviously the people like Whitesushi, and that was an interesting story. And
Right, right. Saying, okay, so a lot of organization, that's the stuff that you're in charge of mostly, like the Discord channel, like the whole orchestrating side of things, and then high player quality and some great diversity and great data miners, very competitive players, great content creators. I hear you a lot on that. And what do you attribute to casual success in events and PvP over time? Like, do you do a lot of internal tests within the guild?
it's actually a lot of just trial and error. So I think a lot of people recognize casuals for its successes. It was never something that was magical and we were just flawless over one night. Like we learn. Actually, I personally learn most through making mistakes and honest self introspection. And I think that's actually how we've done things at Casuals. We try a lot of things, we make a lot of mistakes, but the one thing we always try to do is have honest self introspection and never try to make the same mistake twice. And I think through a commitment towards that ideal, we've been able to. We've had the success stories and the consistent success, but we've also had to go through our own lump.
Right. So you're the organizing element of it, and the way that it succeeds, let me see if I get you straight here, is that people are only seeing the success. But behind the lines, there's the Discord channel, there's the experiments, there's all the different channels and all the different people talking. And you on the organization side have also felt your own failures and your own successes. And together, just with this great people diversity that you have and the great organization that you got to have over time, is that what you feel essentially makes casuals what it is?
Yeah. I would agree to that. And it's I think again, like I think a lot of people like I'm the one doing the podcast with you, but I would be remiss to say that I should deserve the lion's share of the credit because I think a guild is only as good as the people that comprise it. I have an extensive list of people to really give so much credit to. Whether it's players like Jalone or Fishsticks, or in the olden days like Kita, and them, like people who are I consider to be my mentors in the game, and then people who we have so many different languages in casual. We're blessed to have an extensive Korean population, and I need to thank people like Root and in the olden age Pooh and a lot of the Koreans. And even now, like when the game released in Japan, we were lucky to have members like Alex Straza who were bilingual, and obviously the players who joined us and establishing the infrastructures, and even like the multicultural aspect. We try to incorporate Chinese people and really make it very suitable for when the game released in China. But I think on the topic of mistakes, for example, casuals was, I think at the time that the game dropped in China, we didn't actually have that infrastructure to fully cater to those players. So I think it created a bit of a anti-synergy when incorporating them that we've systematically over time looked to rectify. But it's again like it's an example of, I mean, we've had success, but it's been on the back of making mistakes and failure. And I think we're perceived in a certain way, but it's actually, I think, inherently it's a blue collar guild, and we go a lot by what people contribute and what they want to contribute, and obviously it's a balance of they're playing the game and also they're having fun.
Right. So I see definitely how, as the great leader that you are, you're able to put down the mistakes and the success. I also feel like breaking the language barrier to getting access to more information is one of those key things that any real high competitive guild in the end needs to do. You're very lucky to have many players like you've mentioned, and Whitesushi, for example, and others that are able to bring back this information to the community, especially to casuals, but definitely a very successful guild. Another thing I'd like to ask you, at least for me, like looking from the outside, is I see a lot of leadership change. Like a lot of times you'd see May, yourself, Isaac move between these positions. What's behind that?
Honestly, for me personally, as I mentioned, I was the founder of Casuals. Bamboozle, it's actually just it's more sobering to talk about that because it's actually player burnout, player retirement. So Bamboozle started Casuals in May 2019, and I think he pretty much burnt out in around September, right around when Kita joined, and then Kita went from September to February, and in February again he was burnt out. I think he burnt out right around the time when Elder Tree was being incorporated into the game.
Hmm.
And then I persisted until June or July, and I pretty much burnt out when Hero Hotels were being integrated into the game, or Whale Inn, and
So are burnouts what's mandating the leadership changes?
yeah, it ends up becoming a burden of responsibility just because when you're the leader of a guild, you're looked in a certain way, and there's a lot of infrastructural, like playing being a leader of a community is different from playing the game in the more conventional sense. You're not focused, like as I mentioned, like I'm only on chapter 20.
I can definitely connect to you on that, by the way. I have my own Discord. Shout out to the Discord that I manage many people that are way smarter than me there. Some people that run some crazy analysis. This one guy, Season, just published an amazing guides on Fest Reward. Never in my life have I went it so in depth about anything. So I definitely hear you on that topic. And what is Casuals doing to address this player burnout that's essentially taking those top talents away?
So actually, it's a very fascinating question because when I started Casuals too, it originally started as a feeder guild to Casuals. And as I mentioned, right around the time when I started Casuals too, Bamboozle kind of retired from the game. So actually having the leader of the guild of the main Casuals guild retire facilitated,
Burnout.
yeah, it facilitated a lot of subsequent retirements, guys like Mastermind, St. Regis.
That hurts so hard.
So turnover in Casuals was rapid, and as I said before, Casuals too was just me and like 40 of my alt accounts, and so
It used to be 30. Is this rising over time?
I was recruiting guys like Jalone, and then in a week, like they went to Casuals. I guess starting from ground zero again.
This is what a hard-working man sounds like. By the way, it's 6 a.m. in the morning for him with all this energy. Definitely a hard-working man you're hearing over here that built this thing from scratch. And one thing I really want to know before
Yeah.
we wrap it up is that what are your plans for the future of casuals? Where do you see casuals going?
Yeah, it's a very interesting discussion. I'm no longer the leader of Casuals, Casuals 2, and Casuals 3 all simultaneously anymore. I went through my period of burnout, and I returned because of the family. And I want to, like, again, there's so many names I really want to give like my deepest thanks towards. And
I mean, we're on a podcast. You can go ahead.
yeah, I think those players know who they are, and if I start rattling a list of names, I'm gonna leave out like a bunch of them. But I'm back because of the Casuals and the Casuals family and the culture that we built. Not being the leader anymore of all three guilds, like I'm just one part of it. And the vision, I feel like the vision of a guild is ultimately dictated by the motivation of its players. And
Right.
as I said, Casuals 2 started as a feeder guild, but eventually it was able to make a name for itself. And similarly, going forward, the vision of it will be dictated by how the game continues to develop. Abyssal Expedition is something that it's a relatively newer integration into the game. And a lot of competition, I think, inter-guild competition is now fixated on placements for that. Obviously, Legends Regional Championship is always going to be there. I think for me, it's about maximizing people in our casuals family and the community overall, and continuing to push the limits of whether that is of each players, whether that is more minute details associated with gameplay dynamics, progression, competitive PvP meta. I think it's almost like an endless sea of things that the game will always have a potential of offering. And as long as people are interested in that, and as long as community and the family is there, there's always going to be things that can be improved upon.
Right. So that's, I think, a great message to live it on. Empower people so that they can live your guild with the competitive success that you need. All right. I'm very happy that we got to do this, Newton. I think this is going to shed some light, but definitely not all light, on what's happening inside the casuals for everybody that's very curious. And this was an amazing pleasure for me to meet you. And I'm very happy that you came on. Thank you very much.
I'm very humbled once again. Thank you for having me on here. I hope we can do it again soon. And
sounds great. Huge
shout out to you and the content you produce, and to everyone listening to this podcast and the entire AFK community. It's there wouldn't be a game if it wasn't for the community that played it. So
100%. Words of a leader. Thank you very much.